Honestly, Carol, it's just a casserole. You don't need to make such a production of it. My son-in-law, Mark, said it with a laugh. He waved his fork in the air like he was conducting an orchestra. The rest of the family at my daughter Sarah's dinner table just smiled weakly into their plates. My sweet potato casserole, the one I spent all afternoon peeling and baking, sat untouched in the center of the table. The tiny marshmallows on top were perfectly browned. A hot flush crawled up my neck. I could feel the hum of Sarah's expensive stainless steel refrigerator behind me. The smell of roast chicken and garlic filled the air, but all I could think about was the weight of his words. I had wanted to contribute, to bring something special. Instead, I felt like a foolish old woman who had tried too hard. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. She just cut her chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. I drove home under the pale glow of the streetlights. The casserole dish was on the passenger seat next to me, cold now. Its weight felt like an accusation. My house was dark and quiet when I walked in. It still held the faint, comforting scent of my late husband, George, a mix of old books and sawdust. I put the casserole in the refrigerator. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I sat down at the small desk in the living room and turned on my computer. The screen lit up my face in the dark. My Social Security payment had been deposited. I felt that little wave of relief I always did on the 3rd of the month. Then my eyes scanned the list of recent transactions. There it was, from last Tuesday. A $200 transfer to Mark. The description just said, car repair. My own car had been making a funny rattling noise for a month. I kept putting off taking it to the shop. The phone rang the next morning while I was washing my one coffee cup. It was Mark. His voice was smooth and charming, like honey poured over gravel. "Hey, Carol. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings last night," he said. "It was just a joke. You know how I am." "It's fine, Mark," I said. My voice was flat. "Great. Listen, you're an absolute lifesaver. Sarah and I have a chance to go away for the weekend. A last-minute thing. Could you possibly watch Buster?" Buster was their yappy little terrier. Before I could think, the words were out of my mouth. "Of course. I don't mind." The need to be useful, to be wanted, was a powerful thing. He thanked me over and over, telling me I was the best mother-in-law in the world. When I hung up, the silence in my kitchen felt heavy and foolish. Their house was always cold. The air conditioning hummed constantly. Buster sniffed around my ankles for a minute, then settled onto his plush little bed. Mark was grabbing a briefcase from his home office when he stopped and leaned against the doorframe. "You know, Carol, your place is awfully big for just one person," he said, that easy smile on his face. "All that cleaning must be a real burden at your age." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. George and I had built that house. I remember the day we picked out the lot, the way he held my hand and said, "This is where we'll grow old, Carol." It wasn't a burden. It was my home. Mark picked a piece of lint off his suit jacket. "Have you updated your will recently?" he asked, as casually as if he were asking about the weather. The next day, I went to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The pharmacist, a nice young woman, slid the little white bag across the counter. "That'll be $42.50 today, Mrs. Gable," she said with a kind smile. The copay went up a little. $42.50. I swallowed hard and pulled out my credit card. My checking account was looking thin until the 1st of the month. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. I walked past the bright red strawberries, their sweet smell filling the aisle. I looked at the price, then at the carton of generic oatmeal in my cart. I put the strawberries back. The oatmeal would have to do. I wondered if Mark and Sarah were eating strawberries on their weekend trip. The phone rang just as I was wrapping the lemon pound cake for the church potluck. It was Sarah, and her voice was tight with stress. "Mum, thank goodness you answered. The plumber is coming to fix the sink, but Mark and I have a can't-miss lunch meeting. Could you possibly come over and wait for him? The window is 12 to 3. My heart sank. My potluck started at 1. I looked at the cake, smelling the sweet lemon zest. Oh, well, I was planning on... Please, Mum. It would be a lifesaver. I'll leave a key under the mat. She said it so fast, it wasn't really a question. I sighed. Of course, honey. I'll be right there. I spent the next 3 hours sitting on their stiff leather sofa. The house was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. It smelled like cinnamon plug-ins, a scent that always gave me a headache. I wasn't family in that house. I was staff. I looked at the clock on the wall, its ticking loud in the quiet room, and knew all my friends were laughing and sharing food without me. A few weeks later, Mark threw a big backyard barbecue for his work colleagues. The air smelled of grilled burgers and freshly cut grass. He insisted I come. "Everyone wants to meet my wonderful mother-in-law," he'd said. He put his arm around my shoulders as a group of his co-workers came over. They were all so young, in their crisp shirts. "Everyone," Mark announced with a big, booming laugh. "This is Carol, Sarah's mom, my personal chef and ATM." A wave of polite laughter went through the group. My face burned hot. I felt my smile freeze in place. Later, when I tried to tell him it hurt my feelings, he just waved his hand. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke." But I saw the look in his eyes. He meant every word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went into the living room and pulled an old photo album from the bottom of the bookshelf. The cover was faded red velvet. I opened it, and there was George, my George, smiling at me from a fishing boat 20 years ago. The pages smelled faintly of dust and old paper. We had so many plans. He always wanted to buy an RV and drive to the Grand Canyon. "We'll see the whole country, Carol," he used to say, his hand warm on mine. A deep wave of grief washed over me, so sharp it stole my breath. It wasn't just for George. It was for the life we were supposed to have, the one that was stolen from me. I wondered what he would think if he could see me now. I decided I had to try one more time. I called Sarah the next day. I kept my voice calm and steady. "Honey, that joke Mark made at the party, it really bothered me." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice got that defensive edge I knew so well. "Mum, Mark's just under a lot of pressure at work. You know how he is. He was just trying to be funny." "It didn't feel funny," I said quietly. "It felt like he was making fun of me." "Well, maybe you're taking it the wrong way," she said, her voice turning cold. "You can be a little dramatic sometimes." It was clear she thought I was the problem. We were quiet for a moment, and then she changed the subject. "Speaking of work," she said, her tone suddenly sweet again. "Mark's bonus is a little delayed. I was wondering if you could maybe lend us a larger amount, just until it comes through." After I hung up, I went out to my garden. It was the only place I felt any peace. I knelt in the soft dirt, the handle of my trowel cool and solid in my hand. I pulled at a stubborn weed, its roots clinging deep in the soil. The feeling of injustice was a lead weight in my chest. She hadn't heard a word I said. All she'd heard was an opportunity. I looked at my roses, their petals perfect and silent, and a terrible clarity settled over me. I was completely and utterly alone in this. The apple pie was still warm on my lap. I let myself into Sarah's house with the key she gave me for emergencies. The air inside was cool and still, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. I set the pie on the kitchen counter, on the cold granite. I was about to call out for Sarah when I heard Mark's voice. He was in his home office, the door slightly ajar. His voice wasn't the charming one he used for me. It was sharp, like broken glass. "Look, I know," he was saying into his phone. "I just have to handle the dramatic old burden for a little while longer. Once she sells the house, we're golden." My hand froze just above the pie. Dramatic old burden. The words hung in the air, uglier than anything I had ever heard. I backed away from the counter, quiet as a mouse. I picked up the pie. My hands didn't even shake. I slipped back out the front door, closing it so softly it didn't make a sound. I got into my old Buick, the driver's seat, sighing under my weight. I placed the pie on the passenger seat beside me. I just sat there in the driveway, staring at their perfect, manicured lawn. My hands started to tremble then, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Dramatic old burden. The words echoed in my head. A cruel little drumbeat. The hurt was a physical thing, a hot poker in my chest. And then something else started to bubble up from underneath the pain. It was cold and quiet and heavy. It was anger. When I got home, I went straight to the old wooden desk in the spare bedroom. George's desk. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a dusty accounting ledger. It smelled like old paper and cedar. I opened it to a fresh page. The lines were pale blue and perfect. I sat there for 3 hours with a ballpoint pen and my reading glasses. I wrote down every single time I had given them money. The 200 for the car repair, the 500 for the vet bill, the 1,000 for their anniversary trip. On and on it went, page after page. When I was done, I added it all up. The final number stared back at me. It was staggering. I felt a hot flush of shame, of foolishness. Then I took a deep breath. A mother's love is not a debt to be collected. I whispered it to the empty room. I felt the shame turn into something hard and clear, like a diamond. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a text from Mark. The little screen glowed with his words. "Need you to grab our dry cleaning. Thanks." "No, please. Just an order." My heart started to pound, a frantic bird in my chest. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the letters. For years I would have replied, "Of course," or "On my way." This time I typed something new. I typed one word. "No." Then I pressed send. The little blue bubble shot across the screen, a tiny cannonball of defiance. My phone rang less than a minute later. The screen showed Sarah's picture. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my hand slick with sweat. "Hello? Mum? Is everything okay?" Her voice was tight with worry. "Mark said you were being a little weird. He's waiting for that suit for his trip." I looked out my window at the rose bushes George had planted. "I was busy, honey," I said. The lie felt strange in my mouth, but it also felt like a small piece of armor clicking into place. There was a pause. Before Sarah could say anything else, my phone buzzed with another text message, this one from Mark. It popped up at the top of my screen. "We need to talk about my business investment. It's important." I drove to the bank the next morning. It was a Tuesday, so the line was short. The air inside smelled like clean paper and that faint metallic scent of money. I walked up to the counter, the cool marble smooth under my elbows. The teller was a young woman with a kind smile. Her name tag said, Maria. "How can I help you, Mrs. Gable?" she asked. "I'd like printed statements for all my accounts, please." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. For the past 2 years. She tapped on her keyboard, the clicking sound echoing in the quiet bank. A few minutes later, the printer behind her whirred to life. She handed me a thick stack of papers, held together with a rubber band. They felt heavy in my hands, solid. Holding the paper evidence, all those little transfers to Mark in black and white, made my resolve feel real. On my way home, I called my neighbour, Betty. We met for coffee at her kitchen table an hour later. Her house always smelled like cinnamon and lemon polish. I watched her pour coffee into 2 chipped floral mugs, the steam rising between us. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't bring myself to say the words "dramatic old burden" out loud. I just said Mark was putting a lot of financial pressure on me, and that Sarah didn't see it. Betty listened, her brow furrowed. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was warm and dry. "Honey," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you don't owe them your entire life." Her simple words landed in my heart like a lifeline. I had been treading water for so long, and she had just thrown me a life raft. I realized I hadn't been living my life, just funding theirs. The next evening, Mark came over to my house. He came alone, which was unusual. He filled my doorway, smelling of expensive cologne and false sincerity. I let him in, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He sat on George's armchair like he owned it and launched into a story about a brilliant new business. A can't-miss investment opportunity. He used words like synergy and market disruption. They meant nothing to me. All I heard was the hum of the refrigerator. "It's a sure thing, Carol," he said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming. "We'll double our money in a year, but the window is closing fast. I need to secure my spot." Then he named the price. He needed $20,000. He painted a beautiful picture of how it would help him and Sarah finally get ahead, maybe even buy a bigger house. "A house with a room for me," he added with a wink. I just looked at him. His smile was so wide, so practiced. It never quite reached his eyes. I thought about the bank statements sitting in my desk drawer. I thought about the fresh fruit I'd left behind at the grocery store. I took a slow breath and folded my hands in my lap. "That's a lot of money, Mark," I said, keeping my voice even. "I need to think about it." His smile faltered for just a second. Of course, but it's time sensitive." "Come back on Friday," I told him. "You can have my answer then." He left, looking pleased with himself, confident he had me hooked. I watched his car pull away from the curb, the red tail lights disappearing into the dark. The silence he left behind felt like a blessing. The next morning, I drove to the big electronics store over by the highway. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh of cold air that smelled like plastic and cardboard. Under the bright, humming lights, I found what I was looking for. A small, simple digital voice recorder, no bigger than my thumb. The young man at the counter showed me how it worked. One button to record, one button to stop. Simple. I spent the afternoon at my kitchen table practicing. I recorded the local news, then the sound of the church bells from down the street. I listened back, hissing with static. But the voices were clear. I hid the tiny device in the ceramic pot of the fake orchid on my coffee table, tucking it behind a stiff silk leaf. The little red recording light was completely hidden. I was ready for Friday. Mark arrived right on time, smelling of expensive cologne. The grandfather clock in the hall bonged 3 times. I had a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and the warm smell filled the living room. "Carol, you're a lifesaver," he said, taking the mug I offered. His smile was as bright as the afternoon sun. We sat on the sofa. I told him I was hesitant. $20,000 is my entire emergency fund, Mark. It's what George and I saved for a rainy day. His smile tightened just a little. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. I understand. But this isn't just for me. This is for Sarah's future, for your grandchildren's future. He set his mug down on the coaster with a soft click. After all we've done for you, helping with the yard, having you over, I thought you loved Sarah enough to want her to be secure. He paused, letting the words sink in. Don't be a burden on her happiness, Carol. I didn't look at him. I looked at the fake orchid on the coffee table. I watched the little red light, no bigger than a pinprick, glowing steadily from behind a green silk leaf. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I locked the front door. The house was completely silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I walked back to the living room and picked up the small digital recorder from the ceramic pot. It felt cool and light in my palm. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern, and pressed the play button. His voice filled the quiet room, tinny and strange, without his charming face attached to it. For Sarah's future, I thought you loved Sarah. Don't be a burden on her happiness, Carol. Hearing the words alone, stripped of his smile, made my stomach clench. The manipulation was so clear, so ugly. I listened to the whole thing twice. Any last little flicker of doubt I had, any hope that I was just being a sensitive old woman, vanished. A cold, quiet calm settled over me. I knew exactly what I had to do. Thanksgiving morning was bright and crisp. I stood at my kitchen sink, peeling potatoes. The rhythmic scrape of the peeler was comforting. The earthy smell of the potatoes filled the air. My hands, wrinkled and spotted, moved with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The phone rang, and I answered it on speaker, wiping my wet hands on my apron. "Hello, dear," I said. "Hi, Mum. Happy Thanksgiving." Sarah's voice was cheerful. "Just wanted to make sure you're still bringing your famous sweet potato casserole. Uncle Robert is already asking about it." "Of course I am," I said. "The marshmallows are all ready to go." I looked out the window at the yellow leaves still clinging to my maple tree. I can't wait to see the whole family. I'll be there around 2. My voice was perfectly even, as warm as the autumn sun. I arrived at their house right on time, the heavy casserole dish warm on my lap in the car. The front door opened before I even knocked, and the house spilled out its sounds and smells: laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the rich scent of roasting turkey. A dozen relatives were already there, milling around the living room. Mark came over immediately, his face flushed with excitement. He took the casserole from me and gave me a big hug, squeezing my shoulders. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper in my ear. "Have you thought about our little project?" I pulled back and gave him a warm, pleasant smile. "Mark," I said, my voice clear enough for a few nearby cousins to hear. "It's all I've been thinking about." Dinner was a loud, happy affair. We all squeezed around the long dining table, passing bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans. The candlelight flickered on everyone's faces. Mark sat at the head of the table, beaming like a king. After everyone had their first serving, he tapped his water glass with a fork. The chatter died down. "I'd just like to make a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To family. To being there for each other, through thick and thin." He looked down the table, and his eyes landed right on me. "And especially to generations supporting each other. It's the most important thing there is." Everyone murmured in agreement and raised their glasses. I raised mine, too. The hypocrisy was so thick I could cut it with my turkey knife. I stood up, my knees a little shaky. The linen napkin felt soft in my hand. "Speaking of support," I said, my voice clear and steady. The clinking of forks stopped. Every eye in the room turned to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small black digital recorder. I set it on the table, right next to the gravy boat. Then I pressed the little triangle button. Mark's voice, slick and persuasive, filled the stunned silence. "I thought you loved Sarah. This is for her future." The recording went on. We all heard him beg. We all heard him cajole. And then we all heard him say it, the words that had been branded into my mind. "Don't be a burden on her happiness, Carol." The silence that followed was heavier than a winter blanket. I pressed the stop button. The little red light went out. I looked around at the shocked faces, then picked up the serving fork. "Now?" I asked calmly. "Who wants more turkey?" For a moment, nobody moved. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Then Mark's chair scraped violently against the wood floor as he jumped to his feet. His face was a dark, blotchy red, like a spoiled plum. "What is this?" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're twisting my words. This is what she does, everyone. She's a manipulative, dramatic old woman." He was shouting now, his voice cracking. The charming mask he wore was gone, shattered on the dining room floor. Everyone saw him. My sister, my nieces, Sarah's quiet cousins. They saw the ugly, greedy man I had been dealing with for years. He wasn't charming anymore. He was just loud. Sarah hadn't moved. She was staring at me, her face as pale as the tablecloth. Tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks, silent and steady. She didn't wipe them away. Her gaze flickered from her husband, his face twisted in rage, to me, her mother, standing there holding the turkey fork. Her whole body was trembling. It was as if she was seeing two worlds collide, and she was trapped in the middle. The man she married, and the mother who raised her. One was screaming. One was quiet. My sister, Martha, who was sitting next to Mark, put her hand on his arm. Her voice was low, but cut through his yelling like a sharp knife. "Mark," she said, looking right at him. "I think you should leave." He sputtered for a second, looking around for an ally, but found none. He yanked his arm away from Martha, grabbed his coat from the back of his chair, and stormed toward the front door. The slam echoed through the house, making the silverware on the table jump. After that, the party fell apart. People mumbled awkward goodbyes, not looking at me or at Sarah. "We should get going," one cousin said. "Long drive back?" said another. Soon the house was empty, except for me and my daughter and a table full of ruined food. I stood up and started gathering plates. Sarah watched me for a moment, then slowly got up and began helping, neither of us speaking a word. The only sound was the scrape of china and the running water in the sink. That night, tucked into my own bed, my phone started buzzing on the nightstand. One text after another from Mark. They were vicious, full of threats and insults I won't repeat. I deleted them without finishing them. Then, a single message came through from a different number. It was Sarah. "How could you, Mom?" I read the words on the bright screen in the dark room. I felt a pang in my chest, a small, familiar ache. But it was different this time. It wasn't shame. It was just sadness. For her. I set the phone down, pressed the side button until the screen went black, and rolled over. For the first time in months, I slept right through the night. The next morning, the house was quiet. The nasty texts from Mark were a bad dream I had already forgotten. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun rise through the window. The light hit the little dust motes dancing in the air. My friend Betty had given me a business card a few months back, after her own sister had trouble with a greedy son. I found it in my recipe box, tucked behind a card for lemon meringue pie. The name on it was Catherine Albright, Estate Planning. I picked up the phone. My hand was steady. "Yes, I'd like to make an appointment," I said to the woman who answered. My voice didn't even shake. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since George died. The lawyer's office was downtown, in an old brick building with a quiet, humming air conditioner. It smelled of paper and faint perfume. Catherine Albright was a woman about my daughter's age, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She didn't waste my time with small talk. She listened while I explained what I needed. She nodded, her pen making small, neat notes on a yellow legal pad. Then she turned to her computer and started preparing the documents. I signed the new will first. My house would go to Sarah, but in a special trust. A trust Mark could never, ever touch. Then I signed the new healthcare directive, and finally, the durable power of attorney. I looked at the line where it asked for my agent. I wrote in Betty Swanson, not Sarah. It felt like taking a deep, clean breath for the first time in years. When I got home, I sat in my favorite armchair and looked at my phone. There were 3 new messages from Mark. I didn't read them. I just held my finger on his name until a little menu popped up. I pressed, "Block this caller." A small box asked me to confirm. I pressed, "Block contact." The silence that followed was a relief. It was a beautiful afternoon, so I went out into the garden. The air was crisp and cool. I got my shears from the shed and started pruning the dead heads off my rose bushes. The sharp snip of the blades was a very satisfying sound. A little after 5 o'clock, there was a knock on my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was Sarah. She was alone, huddled in a thin sweater, her eyes red and puffy. She looked like a lost little girl. She knocked again, a soft, hesitant tap. "Mum? Are you there?" For a moment, I didn't move. A part of me, the old part, wanted to rush out and wrap her in a hug and tell her everything would be okay. But I knew that was the road back to where I'd been. I took a slow breath, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. She looked up, her face crumpled with misery. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for just a second before I opened the door wider. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd made the phone call to the lawyer. I poured her a cup of tea, but she just wrapped her cold hands around the mug. We didn't speak for a long time. "He told me what you did," she finally said, looking at the tabletop. I played a recording of what he said. I corrected her gently. "There's a difference." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told her. About the little comments that felt like tiny paper cuts. About the constant requests for money. The loans. The barbecue, where he called me his ATM. The feeling of sitting in her perfect, silent house waiting for the plumber. Feeling like a servant. For the first time, she didn't interrupt. She didn't make excuses. She just listened. The chlorine smell hit me the second I walked into the senior center. It reminded me of taking Sarah to swim lessons when she was just a little girl. My old swimsuit felt tight in all the wrong places, but I slid into the warm water of the pool. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Donna, put on some music from the 70s. For an hour, I just focused on moving my arms and legs in the water. It didn't hurt my knees at all. Afterward, A woman with bright white hair bobbing in a pink swim cap paddled over to me. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Marge. This is Helen," she said, pointing to another woman. "We always get coffee after. You should join us." My sister Jean called the next morning while I was washing my breakfast dishes. The sunlight was streaming into my kitchen, making little rainbows in the soap bubbles. "Carol, it's me. I just wanted to see how you were holding up," she said. Her voice was gentle. "I'm fine, Jean. Really." There was a pause. "Listen," she said, her voice dropping a little. "The whole family is talking. Everyone's on your side. We all saw it for years, honey. That man always had shifty eyes. We just, we never knew how to say anything without starting a war with Sarah." I leaned against the counter, the dishcloth still in my hand. It was a strange feeling, like being rescued from a boat I didn't even know was sinking. I found a realtor in the phone book, a woman named Ms. Davis. She arrived right on time, wearing a sharp blue suit and smelling faintly of hairspray. She walked through every room of the house I'd built with George, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors. "You've kept the place up beautifully, Mrs. Gable," she said, making notes on a clipboard. I felt a swell of pride. "I'm not looking to sell," I told her firmly. "This is just for my own information." She nodded, understanding. "Of course." She sat at my kitchen table and showed me the final number on her report. It was more than I ever imagined. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Well, whenever you might be ready," she said. "Just so you know, a developer has been asking about this street specifically." A few nights later, the phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was small, not angry like it had been. "Hi, Mum," she said. I waited, listening to the hum of my refrigerator in the quiet house. I wanted to tell you something," she stammered. "I started seeing someone. A therapist." I took a slow breath. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice even. "She said I have a pattern of enabling," Sarah whispered, like the words tasted strange in her mouth. "I don't really know what that means yet, but I'm trying to figure it out." The next Thursday, I went to my first volunteer shift at the public library. The children's section smelled like old paper and lemon floor polish. I sat in a little wooden chair that was much too small for me and opened a picture book about a bear who lost his hat. A half-dozen little faces stared up at me, their eyes wide. I gave the bear a deep, rumbly voice, and the squirrel a squeaky one. When the story was over, a little girl with pigtails came up and wrapped her tiny arms around my legs in a hug. It was a simple, uncomplicated kindness. I realized I was smiling, a real smile, and it had absolutely nothing to do with being needed by my family. The dust in the garage smelled like old memories and forgotten projects. I spent a whole Saturday clearing it out. George's old tools were heavy in my hands. I remembered him showing me how to use a power drill, his hand warm over mine. Mark had always looked at that tool collection with greedy eyes, dropping hints about borrowing them permanently. I put a price tag on the whole set. The next morning, I arranged everything on folding tables in my driveway. The sun felt good on my back. A young man with a little girl holding his hand stopped by. He picked up George's favorite hammer. "My dad had one just like this," he said, his voice soft. "I'm trying to teach my daughter how to build a birdhouse." I sold him the entire collection for $50. Watching him load the heavy toolbox into his station wagon, I didn't feel a bit of sadness. It just felt right. The automatic doors of the grocery store hissed open. I was just reaching for a head of lettuce when a voice, low and angry, spoke right behind me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" It was Mark. He stood too close, blocking my cart. The cold air from the vegetable mister washed over my arms. He looked thinner, and his eyes had a mean little glint I'd never seen so clearly before. "You're trying to turn Sarah against me," he hissed. "You'll regret this, old woman." I looked up from the lettuce and met his eyes. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, at the angry, small man he had become. Then I pushed my cart around him and headed for the checkout. His power over me was gone. It had evaporated into the cold grocery store air. The bus smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. Betty and I had the front seat. We watched the highway roll by as we headed for the coast. It was the first real trip I'd taken in years. "It's about time we did something for ourselves," Betty said, patting my hand. We stayed in a little motel with a balcony that overlooked the ocean. We ate fried clams from a cardboard box, sitting on a bench while seagulls cried overhead. The salt spray felt cool on my face. That night, we talked for hours, our voices soft under the sound of the waves. I told her things I hadn't even told myself. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I was back home for 2 days when the phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded tired. "Hi, Mum," she said. "I just wanted to let you know. Mark and we're going to marriage counseling." I sat down in my kitchen chair, the linoleum cool under my feet. The old me would have rushed in with advice, with opinions, with offers to help. But the new me just listened. "I hope you find the clarity you're looking for, honey," I said. And that was all. I wasn't his problem to solve anymore. And more importantly, I wasn't her problem to solve either. My part in their drama was over. A week later, Sarah called again. She got right to the point. "Mum, I hate to ask," she started, and my stomach tightened. "I'm a little short this month. The car payment is due. I was just wondering if you could help me out, just this once." My heart ached for her. It was the hardest thing in the world to hear that need in her voice. But I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, honey, but I can't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "My budget just doesn't allow for it anymore." The boundary felt like a brick wall I had built with my own 2 hands. On the other end of the line, there was a long, heavy silence. I decided to host a small dinner party. Not a big holiday meal with obligations and resentments simmering under the gravy, but a simple meal for my new friends. I invited Betty from next door, and Marge and Helen from my water aerobics class. The house filled with the smell of roast chicken and rosemary. We sat around my dining table, the one that had seen so many tense family dinners. But tonight, it was different. It rang with laughter. Marge told a story about her grandson and a mishap with a garden hose that had us all wiping tears from our eyes. "It's so good to hear you laugh like this, Carol," Betty said, raising her wine glass. The crystal made a soft clinking sound. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "It's good to be laughing," I told her. My house felt warm again, filled not with duty, but with genuine friendship. The joy felt so solid, so real, it almost made me forget the ugliness that had happened here. Almost. A few days later, the mailman brought a certified letter. I had to sign for it on his little electronic pad. The envelope was crisp and heavy, with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize printed in the corner. My heart gave a familiar, tired thump against my ribs as I carried it inside. I sat at the kitchen table and slit it open with a butter knife. The paper inside was thick, official. It was from a lawyer representing Mark. I scanned the dense paragraphs, my eyes catching on phrases like defamation of character and emotional distress. Then I found the real point of the letter. It vaguely threatened legal action for repayment of past family support. All the little checks I'd written, the groceries I'd bought, the bills I'd helped with, he was trying to twist them into a debt I owed him. It was a bluff, a desperate, ugly bluff, and I knew it. But knowing something in your head and feeling it in your bones are two very different things. I didn't panic. I folded the letter, put it back in its envelope, and picked up my phone. I didn't call Sarah. I called the estate attorney Betty had recommended, the woman who helped me set up my will and trust. Her name was Ms. Albright. "Carol," she said, her voice calm and professional. "What can I do for you?" "I've received a letter," I said. I explained what it said. I could almost hear her nodding on the other end of the line. "Email me a copy," she said simply. "Don't you reply. Don't you worry. I will handle this." I hung up and did exactly as she said. The low hum of my little printer scanner filled the kitchen. I attached the file to an email and pressed send. The little whoosh sound of the message leaving my computer felt like I was handing a great weight to someone much stronger than me. A few hours later, a new email popped up. It was from Ms. Albright, with a document attached. It was a copy of the single-page response she had already sent to Mark's lawyer. Weeks passed. The autumn leaves turned from gold to brown and scattered across my lawn. I went to my swim class. I had coffee with Betty. I checked the mail every day, half expecting another official envelope. But nothing came. The silence from Mark's side was absolute. One afternoon, Betty and I were weeding my rose bushes. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. "Heard anything more from that son-in-law of yours?" she asked, not looking up from a stubborn bit of crabgrass. "Not a peep," I said, snipping a dead bloom from a bush. "Good," she grunted, yanking the weed free. "The trash took itself out." She was right. The empty threat had vanished into thin air. There would be no lawsuit, no more angry letters. I had won. But I still hadn't heard a single word from my daughter, and that was a different kind of silence altogether. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Sarah standing on my porch. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. She clutched her purse with both hands, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Hi, Mum," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I come in?" I made a pot roast, her favourite. We sat at the big dining table, just the two of us. For a long time, the only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the clink of our forks against the plates. Sarah just pushed a piece of carrot around her plate. Finally, she put her fork down and looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mum," she said, and the words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry. I let him diminish you, and I defended it. I was wrong." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. Instead, I just told her the truth. "Thank you for saying that, Sarah." Her apology couldn't erase the hurt, but it was a start. It was the first stone laid on a path back to each other. Our relationship began to heal after that. It was slow work, like coaxing a shy bird to a feeder. We didn't talk about Mark. We talked about the weather, about the book I was reading, about the rising price of eggs. We met for coffee at a little diner halfway between our houses. The vinyl on the booth was cracked, and the air smelled of bacon and bleach. "I miss your pot roast," she said one afternoon, stirring her coffee. "I could make one this Sunday," I offered. My voice was even. She looked up at me, her eyes clear for the first time in a long time. "I'd like that, Mom. I'd really like that. It wasn't the old dynamic of her asking and me giving. It was just two women, a mother and a daughter, planning to share a meal. The first thing I did the next Monday was call the realtor. The phone felt cool and solid in my hand. I've decided not to sell, I told her. I'm staying put. There was no hesitation in my voice. She sounded surprised, but wished me well. Then I called a landscaper Betty had recommended. A nice young man came out and walked the backyard with me. I could smell the damp earth from the morning rain. I want a stone patio right here, I said, pointing to the patch of worn-out grass. A place to sit in the sun. He drew up a little sketch on his clipboard. We can start next week, he said with a smile. It felt like I was finally building something for myself, right in my own yard. A year passed. Thanksgiving rolled around again, a date I had been dreading a little. But this year, it was at my house. The air smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon from the apple pie. Betty was there, along with Marge and Helen from my water aerobics class. Sarah came too. She looked thinner, but her eyes were bright. We sat around my dining table, the good china gleaming under the soft light. The conversation was easy, full of laughter. After we finished eating, Sarah stood up and raised her water glass. Her hand was steady. I'd like to make a toast, she said, her voice quiet but firm. To new beginnings. She looked right at me and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I filed the papers last week. I helped Sarah move her things into a small, sunny apartment over a flower shop. The rooms were filled with cardboard boxes and the clean smell of fresh paint. We didn't talk much, just worked side by side, a comfortable rhythm between us. I held a picture frame steady while she tapped in the nail. It was a photo of the two of us at the beach when she was 10. When we were done, we sat on the floor and shared a pizza out of the box. The sun streamed through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. Thank you, Mum, she said, wiping her hands on a napkin. Not for the help, really. I mean, thank you for your time, for your support. Her words were worth more than any $20,000 check. It was everything. I was sitting on my new patio, a warm cup of chamomile tea in my hands. The landscaper had done a beautiful job. Pots of bright red geraniums lined the stone edge, and a little bird bath gurgled softly in the corner. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. I pulled my cardigan a little tighter against the evening chill. The house my George and I built felt safe and solid around me. I was not a burden. I was the architect of my own quiet, peaceful life.